Are you living a lie? Or more specifically, are you living the archetypal Tenderfoots lie? This video will help you to work out whether you have successfully completed the first of 6 archetypal tests posed by the human life, or whether you have been ensnared by the oh-so-convincing societal lie that wants to stop you from ever getting started. My name's Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the fantasy mental health game Betwixt. And this series of videos is devoted to the, in my opinion, fascinating world of archetypal character arcs. For reference, here are the 6 journeys in the order they would take place in life, because these are sequential, not random. You can't pick and choose between them. You have to start with Tenderfoot, because unless you've taken that journey, you will not be able to take any of the others, which are each reliant on the strengths and wisdom gleaned from the previous journeys. As archetypal, the characters we're focusing on have been around since the dawn of time, cropping up in all types of story from myth to modern movies. The journeys and challenges they face resonate so deeply with us as humans that it's as if they have been programmed into our very DNA. And this means that they offer tremendous potential as tools for personal growth, insight, and just generally living a good life. Every one of these journeys includes 1 main character archetype, 2 antagonists or baddies, 2 shadow archetypes, the dark versions of self that we definitely want to avoid, and finally, a transition from a lie to a truth. The main character, that is, you or I, starts out believing something unhelpful or negative or disempowering about how the world works, and the real pot of gold at the end of the journey is for us to have traded in that lie for an empowering, contrasting truth. Above all else, the lie versus truth is the acid test. This is how we really know if we've made it. And because the lie versus truth can be so transformative, I'd like to challenge you to see if you can work out what these could be for the Tenderfoot as I explain the story arc. I'll reveal them towards the end of the video. The Tenderfoot's Tale is essentially the classic coming-of-age story, an initiation into life as an individual who must learn to survive all by themselves out there in the big bad real world. Examples of the Tenderfoot from pop culture include Neo in The Matrix, Sarah Connor in The Terminator, and Edward in Edward Scissorhands. The Tenderfoot's journey starts out in the symbolic setting of the home, a place that meets a number of their needs and feels comparatively safe or at least familiar, but the Tenderfoot craves independence and difference and something bigger, something realer. In other words, all of a sudden, the Tenderfoot's home has started to feel too small. Sound familiar so far? This is where the journey really begins. Motivated by their need for more, the Tenderfoot is compelled to broaden their horizons and venture into the real world. Picture Neo taking the red pill and opening his eyes to see the Nebuchadnezzar for the very first time. The known world is a thing of the past. Now the Tenderfoot needs to work out how to stay upright with their stabilizers removed. The important thing to know here is that all of these character arcs are about psychological growth and change, which means that we start identified with one archetype at the beginning of the journey, but transition to another over the course of the journey, as the next archetype is awakened. So, when we take the Tenderfoot's journey, we are not becoming the Tenderfoot, we are arcing out of Tenderfoot and into the now awakened warrior self. In other words, this is the journey we must all take in order to establish an individual sense of identity, one that's separate from our childhood rules and assumptions and capable of self-protection in the real world. This is scary, but it's necessary in order to begin the crucial psychological process of individuation. But of course, we don't get to claim that great treasure without traversing considerable obstacles along the way. That is, the villains of the story. The Tenderfoot's antagonists can include anyone or anything that attempts to keep them small, dependent, and unchanged. But in terms of archetypal antagonists, the Tenderfoot will come up against 2 main threats. We're going to take a quick look at each of these before I reveal the all-important lie versus truth. So, the first of the Tenderfoot's archetypal antagonists is authority. This will include parent figures and teachers, etc., anyone that we rebel against during those angsty adolescent years and beyond, but also the very concept of the rules that we're expected to follow, because just as all of these archetypal characters exist as representations or blueprints in our minds as well as externally, archetypal antagonists also exist as aspects of the psyche as well as potentially real things out there in the world. So we may well have antagonistic parents that we need to fight to get away from, but we don't need them in order for this antagonist to exist for us, because we internalize authority in various forms. In our mothers and fathers, both our own and inherited archetypal ones, assumed roles about who we are allowed to be and what we're allowed to do. The process of individuation, then, is the ongoing process of disentangling our sense of self from these inner commands and commanders. The Tenderfoot's task is to take the very first step on this path, which is to acknowledge and respond to their need for individuation, and to begin the journey by leaving the symbolic setting of the home. This alone takes courage, and it requires a certain level of learned resilience, which we don't all get growing up in our childhood environments. The Tenderfoot's journey can therefore easily remain unfulfilled for decades into our lives. In other words, just because we've actually left home doesn't mean that we've made any progress with our inner journeys of individuation. The second of the Tenderfoot's archetypal antagonists is the predator or saboteur. Like authority, this could be a real, external, predatory other, such as the traditional and frighteningly commonplace dodgy, older, controlling, abusive boyfriend or girlfriend. But even without that horrible experience, we all know this antagonist because the predator is also an aspect of the Tenderfoot's inner world and therefore ours. This villain is a personification of the deeply self-destructive thoughts that try to block our growth and individuation. So regardless of whether or not we have any real, objective bad guys in our lives, when we take the Tenderfoot's journey, we will face an internal conflict. And the key question is this: are we willing to sacrifice the familiarity and carefreeness of our limited and therefore protected current world for the glorious freedom and opportunities provided by the bigger and therefore scarier and riskier real world? Not everyone is going to choose the bigger world, not in stories and not in reality either. Trauma can stop people from ever taking that leap. And fear, anxiety, self-doubt, limiting beliefs and shame, even for people without a history of serious trauma, can put the brakes on for decades or indefinitely. So no, completion of the Tenderfoot story arc is not something we can take for granted. But if a Tenderfoot doesn't make their transition to warrior, for whatever reason, then the shadow sides of this archetype will beckon. We're going to explore those darker archetypes in the next video in this series. For now, let's finish with the Tenderfoot's archetypal lie versus truth. Thematically, this journey is about the transition from submission to sovereignty. The Tenderfoot's lie goes like this: submission to authority figures is necessary for survival. And the truth that's claimed by a successful journey sounds like this: personal sovereignty, that is, autonomy over our choices and the life we lead, is necessary for survival and growth. Here's a question for you. Going with your very first gut answer, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being completely false and 10 being entirely true, how would you score that second statement, the Tenderfoot's empowering truth? Does that statement ring 10 out of 10 true for you? Or do you have a way to go with this transition? Here's why this is important. If we don't manage to integrate the Tenderfoot's truth, then rather than leveling up to take the warrior's transformative journey, we're at risk of devolving instead and getting stuck in one of the Tenderfoot's two shadow archetypes, the naif or the tempest. These will be the focus of the next video. In the meantime, if you answered a 9 or lower just now, have a think about this question. What is it, specifically, that stops this empowering statement from feeling entirely true? Your answer to that question is your Tenderfoot's antagonist. So what needs to happen in order for you to believe that you don't have to submit to that idea, person, or other thing? We'll talk more about this in the next video. For now, as always, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts and answers in the comments, and I really hope this helps. If you would like to take an epic journey through a magical world in the name of personal growth and wellness, then you can download Betwixt, the mental health game, which is available on the iOS App Store and Google Play.